Hello and welcome to Top Story. All is not well in Germany's coalition government. The uneasy alliance between Chancellor Angela Merkel's right-wing Christian Democrats and the left-wing SPD is coming under strain over Merkel's foreign policy, in particular her advocacy of human rights in Russia and China. The SPD Vice-Chancellor and Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier has accused Merkel of seeking headlines in her defense of human rights, a reference in particular to her recent meeting with the Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader and a thorn in the side of the Chinese leadership. He was joined by former Social Democrat Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, who said the meeting with the Dalai Lama was a mistake and also criticized Merkel's foreign policy to Russia. Merkel hit back this week, saying that as Chancellor, it was she who would decide who she would meet and insisted her foreign policy would remain founded on principles. Recent opinion polls show popular support for Merkel growing to 40% and the SPD slipping to 24%. Well, joining me now from Berlin to discuss the issues involved is Jan Teschau, Head of European Studies at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks very much for being with us on Top Story. Mr. Teschau, just how strained is the relationship becoming now?
Well, I think it is becoming increasingly strained. We have a relatively well-working grand coalition still at the moment, but the closer the next election campaign is drawing, the next elections will be held in the fall of 2009. The closer we get towards that kind of date, the more strained it will be because, as you said, the SPD has not been benefiting from being in the Grand Coalition, and the SPD will increasingly look for a profile that distinguishes the party from the other coalition partner, and Mr. Steinmeier is now the headman, so to speak, within the coalition, so there is something programmed into the situation that's not quite wonderful.
You mentioned federal elections in 2009, but there are state elections next year as well. How important are they?
Well, they're always important to a certain extent, but I wouldn't overrate them. All the analysts always try to interpret them in a way that, these are referendums on the coalition politics, on the situation on the federal level, but only to a certain extent, I would say, is this true. Also, the state elections that we're going to face are state elections that are not really all that tight. So I wouldn't say that we're facing too much trouble there. But of course, they will contribute to the strains within the coalition to a certain extent, because also there the SPD will try to gain ground at the cost of its coalition partners at the federal level. So yes, it contributes, but it's not going to be the big one. The big one is 2009 for sure.
I suppose you could argue that it's an achievement that they're still together at all, given that there are so many differences between the Christian Democrats and the SPD.
Well, you can argue that, but then on the other hand, the driving forces that keep the coalition together are also pretty strong. In the German political system, a high political price is attached to breaking up a coalition. Whoever is perceived as the culprit behind the breakup of a grand coalition will suffer badly. So there is an incentive for both parties to stay within the coalition for as long as possible. On the other hand, this is of course a weighing of interest. The closer we come towards national elections, the more the parties will maybe consider that the old bargain, staying within the coalition, is more harmful than useful. But at the moment, very, very clearly, it is still more useful for both of the parties to stay within the coalition.
Angela Merkel defines the foreign policy disagreement as a moral issue. And I'd just like to quote from her here. She says, "In foreign politics, we cannot allow our principles and our economic interests to contradict each other." You don't hear that very often from politicians these days.
No, that is very true, and it is also actually something new coming from her. She is a very strong foreign policy chancellor. She pulled off a very good German EU presidency. She mended fences with the American president, and she basically put back the relationship with Russia to normal. And now all of a sudden she has realized that there's maybe a values thing in there as well. It's a kind of a twisted irony that the Conservative Party, the CDU, is blamed for being too principled on foreign policy, whereas the Social Democrats, the left-wing party, insist on the hardcore interest-based approach. It is quite surprising indeed, and it poses a greater dilemma, a dilemma that all governments all over the planet have to face, how to strike the balance between a values-based approach and an interest-based approach.
It must be enough to give German businessmen a heart attack, though.
Well, yeah, German businessmen aren't all that happy about it. But then at the same time, Ms. Merkel, when you look at what she actually said about the China policy, has never really questioned the one China policy, has tried to basically inform the Chinese government beforehand about her meeting with the Dalai Lama. So she's really tried to actually soften her stand beforehand. The Chinese government has decided to play this in a very difficult way. Some of it was, to be expected. The extent to which this was made an issue, I think, is unexpected. Maybe the Chinese are also playing a domestic German game because they're much more friendly with Steinmeier than they are with Merkel.
How much do you think does Angela Merkel's upbringing in East Germany help her define the way she sees foreign policy?
Well, certainly she has a much more sensitive antenna towards questions of human rights and suppression and democracy than her predecessor Schröder ever had. Whether this makes her more emotional, more of an unpredictable kind of leader, I have my doubts about this. She has proven that she's a very, very shrewd player on the political chessboard, that she's not too emotional at all. Actually, it was Schröder who has shown signs of being emotional over and over again during his tenure at the Chancellery. So her upbringing plays a role, makes her more sensitive. Whether that makes her more ineffective or less of a shrewd player in the international arena, I have my doubts about that.
And she also says that she'll be applying the same principled approach to Germany's dealings with Iran, and we can expect more trade restrictions as a consequence.
Well, yeah, but I'm not sure that this has anything to do with a values approach to foreign policy. Here we are in a different situation. The Europeans, not only Germany, but the Europeans as a whole, in this case are the ones with a stick vis-à-vis Iran because they have the much better developed economic relations with that country. So it is really up to the Germans, the Italians, the French and some other countries to get their act together if they want to avoid a military solution. So I think Merkel is preparing the ground here for putting up the heat on Iran. This is much more than just a German or a European game. For this kind of game, we need to tie the Americans into the game, the Israelis, the Turks, of course, Russia and China. Germany's contribution can be substantial, but it's not going to be the only one in this chess game.
And with that, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it. Thanks to Jan Teschau, Head of European Studies at the German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin.
Thank you very
Join
much.
us again next week for another edition of Top Story. Have a good weekend. Goodbye.